Step back. Do not put your hands on anything that belongs to this family. The voice crossed the ruined porcelain like something drawn from a sheath, and every guest in the great hall turned toward the sound at once. Celine Fenn had worked at the clifftop house of the Kovar family for 11 days when she brought a tower of hand-painted plates crashing down in front of 40 of the most dangerous people on the coast. One moment she had been carrying the stack across the polished floor, the antique china balanced against the soft curve of her hip, her arms wrapped around it the way a mother holds a sleeping weight. The next moment she had seen the child, and she had let go of everything. The plates struck the marble and burst apart. Blue and gold shards skated across the floor and under the long memorial table. The sound was enormous. It filled the vaulted room and climbed the stone walls and died into a silence so complete that Celine could hear the sea working against the cliffs far below the windows. Every face in the hall turned to look at the new maid on her knees among the wreckage. She was a large woman, wide at the shoulder and soft through the middle, and she knew exactly how she looked kneeling there in her plain grey uniform with 3 generations of Kovar porcelain scattered around her like fallen snow. She had spent her whole life being looked at this way. She had simply never expected it to happen here, on the day of the memorial, in front of him. The plates had belonged to the matriarch. Every servant in the house knew that. They had crossed an ocean in the year 1890, wrapped in the wedding linens of a bride long dead, and they were brought out only once each year, on this exact day, to honor the men and women of the family who had been buried before their time. Celine had shattered them on the anniversary of the death of the master's only brother. She stayed on the floor. She did not reach for the pieces. She was not looking at the pieces at all. She was looking past the table legs and the frozen guests to the far corner of the hall, where a very small girl stood pressed into the gap between a cabinet and the cold fireplace, her back flat against the stone, her eyes fixed and glassy, and her small chest rising and falling far too fast. The girl was 5 years old. Her name was Anouk, and she had not spoken a single word in the year since the sea had taken her mother and father. She was the last living child of the Kovar bloodline, and at this moment she was sliding down the wall toward the floor, while 40 adults argued about a stack of broken plates, and not one of them had seen her go. Not one of them except the maid. I said, "Step back." Celine lifted her head, and there he was. Emmerich Kovar had come to the head of the hall without a sound. He was a tall man in a charcoal suit, still as a closed door, and the light from the tall windows fell across a face that most people on this coast had only ever seen in their worst moments. He was the reason powerful men lowered their voices at the harbor. He was the reason his own guests had gone quiet the instant he entered. Grief sat somewhere far behind his eyes, locked and guarded, and he looked at the shattered china and then at the trembling woman kneeling in it, and his expression did not change at all. Behind him, a beautiful woman in deep red silk let out a soft and delicate laugh. 11 days, said Isabeau Renard, loud enough to carry, smoothing her sleeve as though the mess might reach her. I did wonder how long the house could keep a girl of her size on its feet. She tilted her lovely head. Perhaps the next set of plates should be served by someone the floor can actually hold. A few of the guests looked down. A few of them smiled. Celine felt the old heat climb her neck and pool in her face, and she heard, from very far away and very close all at once, a voice that had followed her since childhood. You are too much. You are always going to be too much. No one keeps a thing that takes up so much room. She could have apologized. She could have gathered the ruined china into her apron and fled to the scullery and let them laugh her out of the house by nightfall, the way she had been laughed out of every place that had ever measured her worth by the space she filled. Instead, she turned her back on the master of the house, and the broken plates, and the whole silent hall, and she crawled across the floor toward the child no one else had seen. Do not, said Emmerich Kovar, and for the first time something moved in his voice. That is my brother's daughter. Get away from her. Celine did not stop. She stopped an arm's length from the girl and sank down onto the cold floor and made herself small, which was a thing the world had never once believed she could do. She did not reach for Anouk. She did not say the girl's name. She had learned long ago that a frightened thing does not want to be grabbed, and that the fastest way to lose it forever is to close your hand too soon. Behind her she heard footsteps, and the sharp voice of the head housekeeper Danica, and the rustle of 40 guests deciding whether to be entertained or offended. She heard Emmerich Kovar say her surname once, low and dangerous, a warning shaped like a name. She ignored all of it. On the floor of that enormous hall, With her wide back to the most feared man on the coast, Celine Fen had never in her life felt so steady. "You can stay right there," she said quietly, to the child, to no one else. "Nobody is going to make you come out. I only wanted to sit where you are, because it looked like the safest corner in the room." Anouk's eyes moved, only a fraction, but they moved to Soline's face and held there. "They are very loud today," Soline murmured. "I do not like it either. All those people, all that noise about plates." She let her shoulders drop. She kept her hands open and resting on her knees where the girl could see them. "I dropped mine because I saw you needed the floor cleared, and I thought, well, that child got to the good spot first. I had better go and ask if I can share it." Behind her, someone laughed at that, but it was not a cruel laugh, and it did not matter. The master of the house had crossed the hall. She could feel him standing over her now, close enough that his shadow fell across the girl. "She does not respond to strangers," Emmerich said, and the ice in him had cracked just enough to let something raw through. "She does not respond to anyone. Move aside and let her nurse take her." "Her nurse frightens her," Soline said. The silence changed shape. "You have been in this house 11 days, Emmerich said. "The child does not know how long I have been in this house." Soline kept her eyes on Anouk. "But she knows that when the tall clock struck the hour just now, and the whole room went quiet for your brother, everyone turned to look at her. Every single face in this hall turned to the little girl who lost her father, all at once, to watch how she would grieve." Celine's voice did not shake. "She is 5. She cannot breathe under all that looking. She was not being difficult, she was disappearing, and she was 3 steps from the terrace doors, and behind those doors there is nothing but the railing and the drop and the sea that already took her mother and father once." The hall had gone utterly silent now. Even Isabeau had stopped smiling. Emmerich Kovar looked at the open terrace doors. He looked at the 3 steps of empty floor between his brother's daughter and the railing above a 200-foot fall. And something passed over his still face that no guest in that room had ever seen there before. Fear. Plain human fear, for one heartbeat, before he buried it. "You saw all of that," he said slowly, "from the floor, under a falling stack of my mother's china." "I had a very good view of the floor," Soline said. "It is where people like me are usually looking." Nobody laughed at that. Not even Isabeau. "This is absurd," Isabeau said, but her voice had lost its silk. "She is a housemaid. She has been here less than a fortnight. You cannot possibly take the word of a woman who cannot carry a stack of plates across a level floor over the word of the child's own nurse." "The nurse," Celine said quietly, still not turning around, "wears a ring of iron keys at her waist. They rattle when she walks. The child flinches every time she hears them, because the sound of those keys is the last thing she hears before she is taken somewhere she does not want to go." She lifted her open hands a little higher, so Anouk could see them stay empty. "I do not blame the nurse. She is only doing as she is told. But you asked why the girl will not go to her, and that is why. It is not a mystery. You only have to watch the small one instead of the loud ones." Emerikova was very still. Then, without looking away from Soline, he raised one hand, and somewhere at the edge of the hall, the rattle of iron keys went silent as the nurse was quietly waved back. Emmerich crouched. It was a small thing and an enormous thing, this feared man folding down onto his heels among the broken plates, but he did it slowly and he kept his distance, and Soline understood that he was following her lead without seeming to know that he was doing it. "Anouk," he said, very low. The child pressed harder into the stone. "See, she cannot come to you yet," Soline said gently. "Not with the whole room still watching. She needs the eyes to go away first." She turned her head, just slightly, toward the master of the most dangerous house on the coast, and she said the most reckless thing she had said in 11 days. "Tell them to stop looking at her." For a long moment Emmerich Kovar did not move. Then he rose to his full height, turned to his 40 guests, and said in a voice like a closing gate, "The memorial is finished. Leave us." It took the hall 4 full minutes to empty, and Celine never once looked up to watch it go. She stayed on the floor. She hummed under her breath, a low tune of only a few notes, something a woman at the shelter kitchen where she had once scrubbed pots had sung over the broken people in the breadline. She had no idea if the child could hear it over the fear. She hummed anyway, and she began, very slowly, to gather the nearest shards of porcelain into a small, neat pile, as though the most important task in the world was tidying one square of floor. Anouk watched her hands. "This one has a little gold bird on it," Soline said, turning a curved fragment in her fingers. "See, just the wing. The rest of him broke off somewhere." She set it down where the child could reach it. "I will leave him here in case you want to look." The great hall was empty now, save for 3 people. Emmerich Kovar stood by the cold fireplace, unmoving, his hands loose at his sides. And in the tall doorway that led to the inner rooms, unnoticed by both of them, an old woman had come to stand and watch. She was small and straight-backed and dressed in the deep black of a year of mourning, and there was a stillness to her that the master of the house had plainly learned from her long ago. Zora Kovar leaned on a silver-headed cane and said nothing at all. Her sharp dark eyes moved from her son, to the shattered heirloom of her wedding, to the enormous young maid sitting fearless on the floor beside the grandchild who had not spoken in a year. And Zora watched. Anouk's small hand crept out from the shadow of the cabinet and touched the fragment with the gold bird. Soline did not react. She hummed. She sorted another piece. "You do not have to come out," she said, to the floor, to the china, to anyone who might be listening and no one in particular. "I am only tidying. It is a big job. Somebody let all these plates fall." She turned a broken piece over. "I am not very good at holding on to things, you see. My hands are better at letting go than at gripping. That has caused me a great deal of trouble in my life. But once in a while it turns out to be exactly the right thing, at exactly the right moment, and a person forgives their own clumsy hands a little." Across the hall, Emmerich Kovar shifted his weight. He had meant, Soline could tell, to end this, to send the maid away and gather his brother's daughter back into the guarded silence of the house. He had not moved. He stood by the cold hearth like a man who had walked into a room to give an order and forgotten what the order was. The child put a second finger on the porcelain bird, then a third. She was not looking at Soline. She was looking at the small gold wing, and her breathing had begun, very slowly, to lengthen and to slow. "There," Soline murmured. "There is no hurry. Nobody in this whole big room has anywhere else to be." She dared at last to set down the piece she was holding and to rest both of her hands flat and open on the cold marble between them, an invitation with no reach in it. "When you are ready, not before." "My father made me a bird," Soline said, as if to the porcelain. "Out of a bit of old fence. It was not a good bird. One wing was longer than the other, and it could not have flown to save its life." She smiled down at her sorting. "I loved that crooked thing more than anything I ever owned because he made it slow, and he made it for me, and a thing that is made slow for you is worth 10 of the perfect ones you buy." From the folds of her small dress, Anouk drew out a little carved wooden bird, worn pale at the edges from a year of being held. She looked at it. Then she held it out across the gap for the maid to see. Soline's breath caught. She did not grab. She leaned in only enough to look. "Oh," she said softly. "Now that is a beautiful bird. Did someone make that for you? Slow and just for you?" The child nodded. It was the smallest motion. It was the first answer anyone in that house had gotten from her in 365 days. By the fireplace, Emmerich Kovar made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a man makes when something he had given up as lost moves under his hand again, and he had not known until that instant how much weight he had been carrying. Soline glanced up at him without meaning to. He was not cold anymore. His guarded face had come open at the seams, and there was something on it that she would have called wonder on anyone less frightening. He caught her looking. For one unguarded moment, neither of them looked away. Then he closed himself, the way a house closes its shutters against a coming storm, and the stillness returned. But it had happened. She had seen the man behind the master, and he knew that she had seen him. Anouk shifted. Slowly, carefully, testing the floor the way a swimmer tests cold water, the little girl left the safety of her corner and crossed the small distance and settled herself against the wide, warm side of the maid, tucked into the softness of her as though she had found the one shape in the whole stone house that was built to be leaned on. She put the wooden bird in Soline's open palm and closed the large fingers around it. Then she laid her head against Soline and let out a long, shaking breath, and was still. Soline held the child, and held the bird, and did not dare move. It was only then, into that silence, that the old woman in the doorway finally spoke. 11 days, said Zora Kovar, and both of them startled at the sound of her. She came forward, slow and certain over the broken china, her cane clicking against the marble, her eyes never leaving the maid on the floor. My grandchild has not let a living soul touch her for a year. My finest doctors could not manage it. Her own blood could not manage it. The old woman stopped before them and looked down, and something ancient and shrewd moved in her face. 11 days, she said again, softly, and a girl the whole house calls clumsy walks in and does what none of us could do. She turned her sharp gaze on her son. Emmerich, said Zora Kovar, come here. I want to look at your face when I say what I am about to say. And the most feared man on the coast, who had buried a brother and raised an army and never once in his life been ordered anywhere, crossed the room to stand before his mother like a boy. Zora Kovar studied her son's face the way a jeweler studies a stone for the flaw that decides its worth, and whatever she found there seemed to settle something she had been carrying for a long while. Give me your hand, she said. Emmerich held it out. His mother did not take it. Instead, she turned away from him with the slow, deliberate grace of a woman who had buried a husband and a son and refused to hurry for the memory of either, and she crossed the last of the marble to the maid who still sat on the floor with a sleeping child tucked against her wide, warm side. Soline looked up, and the whole grand ruin of the morning seemed to narrow to the small old woman standing over her. You will forgive me, Zora said, if I do not kneel. My knees have carried this family long enough, and they have opinions about floors now. She lowered herself instead onto the edge of a fallen chair, bringing her sharp dark eyes level with Soline's. What is your name, girl? Your whole name, not the one the housekeeper box across the kitchen. Soline Fen, madam. Soline Fen. Zora tasted it. And where did you learn to sit on a cold floor and coax a frightened creature out of a wall without once reaching for it? At a shelter kitchen, madam, and before that. Soline's voice steadied. From being the frightened creature, mostly. You learn what you would have wanted done to you. Something moved behind the old woman's eyes. She reached out and, with a care that surprised everyone watching, brushed one finger against the sleeping child's hair. Anouk did not wake. She only pressed deeper into the maid's side, and her small hand, even in sleep, kept its grip on the wooden bird now closed inside Celine's larger one. A year, Zora murmured. A year of the best doctors on this coast. A year of her own family, and a stranger the house has decided to laugh at does in one morning what none of us could do in 365 days. She lifted her gaze. Do you know what that tells me, Soline Fen? That the doctors were watching the wrong thing, madam. That the whole house was. Zora's mouth curved, and it was not a warm smile, but it was a true one. Then she did a thing that stopped every breath in the hall. She worked a ring from the smallest finger of her own left hand. It was old gold gone soft at the edges from a century of wear, set with a single dark stone worn nearly smooth, the sort of stone that does not sparkle so much as hold light and refuse to give it back. Every servant in that house knew the ring on sight. It had been worn by every Kovar bride for 4 generations. It had been worn by Zora herself for 51 years, and it had not left her hand once in all that time, not through war, not through burial, not through anything. She took Soline's free hand, turned it palm up, and pressed the ring into it. No, Soline breathed. Madam, no, I cannot. I do not even understand what this is. It is the only thing in this house worth more than the plates you broke. Zora closed the young woman's fingers over the ring with both of her thin hands and held them shut. And it is going to a woman who broke them to catch a falling child instead of saving the china, which is exactly the choice I would want made by any woman who married into this blood. Then she turned her head, and she looked at her son, and she said the words the whole coast would be repeating by nightfall. Emmerich, look at me. She is the wife you need, not the one you would choose, the one you need. Emmerich Kovar did not move. He did not speak. The most feared man on the coast, who had never in his life met a room he could not still, with a glance, stood frozen in the wreck of his mother's china, with an expression on his face that none of his enemies had ever earned from him. He looked for one long and defenseless moment like a man who had been struck somewhere no one could see. By the doorway, Isabeau Renard made a sound like silk tearing. "You cannot be serious," Isabeau said. "Zora. She is the help. She is 11 days off the road. She is—" And here the beautiful woman's eyes flicked once, cruelly, over the whole soft width of Soline, and did not need to finish the sentence, because everyone in the room finished it for her. "I am extremely serious," said Zora Kovar, "and I am extremely old, and I have discovered those two things make a woman very difficult to argue with." She rose, leaning hard on her silver cane. For just an instant, as she pushed herself upright, a shadow of something crossed her face, a tightness at the jaw, a held breath, a hand that pressed briefly, flat against her own side beneath the black mourning silk. Soline saw it. Soline, who had spent her whole life reading the bodies of people who were pretending to be fine, saw the old woman's careful face lock down over a pain she was hiding from every soul in that hall, and saw how quickly Zora smoothed it away, and understood all at once and with a cold drop of the heart that the matriarch was not simply being bold. She was being quick. She was a woman doing arithmetic with time she did not have. Zora caught Soline watching. For one heartbeat the old woman's eyes flashed a warning, sharp as a blade. "Say nothing." Soline closed her hand around the ring and said nothing at all. By the next morning, the whole house had chosen a version of the story, and not one of the versions was kind. Soline heard them in the corridors as she carried Anouk's breakfast tray. The clumsy one. The fat one. 11 days and she has bewitched the old woman. Watch her go after the sun next. Danica, the head housekeeper, met her at the nursery door with folded arms and a face like a shut ledger. "I do not know what game you are playing," Danica said, "but the mistress has ordered you off the china and the linens and put you on the child, full time. So the child is yours now. And if one hair on that girl's head comes to grief, it will be me who answers for it to a man who does not forgive. Do you understand what you have walked into?" "I think I understand better than most," Soline said quietly, and went into the child. The days that followed built themselves slowly, the way all real things do. Anouk did not speak again at first, but she waited by the window each morning now for the wide grey shape of the maid to come up the path, and she ate when Soline ate, matching her bite for bite, and she carried the wooden bird everywhere and set it on the table between them at meals, as though it were a third guest. Celine learned the girl's whole silent language in a week. A tug at the sleeve meant "show me," a hand flat on the glass meant "the sea, take me to the sea," a fist over the small carved bird meant "do not leave." On the fourth day, Soline knelt to buckle the child's shoe, and Anouk reached out and set one small hand against the soft round of Soline's cheek, and held it there and looked at her with a question too large for a 5-year-old face. "I am not going anywhere," Soline told her. "You would have to try very hard to be rid of me. I take up a lot of room, and I am hard to move." And the child, for the first time in a year, laughed. It was a small, cracked, rusty sound, like a hinge that had forgotten its own use, and it undid something in Soline's chest that she had thought long since scarred shut. She did not know that Emmerich Kovar had stopped in the corridor outside the open door. She did not know he lingered in the corridor, listening to his brother's daughter laugh, one hand flat against the wall as if the sound had cost him his balance. By the time she turned, the corridor was empty, but he began to appear after that. He came to the nursery at odd hours, always with a reason, never with the truth of one. He came to review the child's schedule. He came to inspect the window locks. He came once carrying a stack of drawing paper and a tin of good pencils that he set on the table without a word, and when Soline began to say that it was too much, he was already gone. "He does not know how to give a thing small," Soline told the child, turning a pencil in her fingers. "Men like your uncle only know how to give a thing enormous. We will have to teach him." Anouk drew a bird. It had one wing longer than the other. On the 6th day, the child pressed her flat hand to the cold nursery glass and would not take it away, and so Soline wrapped her in wool and carried her down the long stair and out along the cliff path to the low wall above the water, where the wind came off the grey sea hard enough to take the breath. "There it is," Soline said, holding the small warm weight against her hip. "That is the thing that took your mother and your father. I know. It is a big cruel thing and it does not care how small you are or how much it hurt you." She let the wind whip her words away. But look, it is also just water. It cannot climb this wall. It cannot come up the path. It has to stay down there and roar all it likes, and we get to stand up here where it cannot reach, and we get to decide how long we look at it before we go back in for something warm. It does not decide. We decide. The child stared down at the water a long time. Her small chest rose and fell. And then, in a voice rusted from a year of silence, so quiet that Soline nearly lost it to the wind, Anouk spoke her first word since the day the sea took her parents. Cold, the child whispered. Celine kept herself perfectly still, as she had learned to around every frightened thing that had ever trusted her enough to speak. It is cold, she agreed, her own voice not quite steady. Shall we go and be warm? Warm, said Anouk, and put her face against Soline's neck, and the two of them turned their backs on the sea and walked home. Soline told no one. Some gifts are not yours to announce. But that evening she found Isabeau Renard waiting for her at the top of the nursery stair, elegant and still as a drawn knife. You think you are very clever, Isabeau said softly. The old woman is dazzled, and the child is charmed, and the whole house is placing bets. But I have known Emmerich Kovar since we were children, and I will tell you a thing about men like him for free. They collect broken things and they enjoy the mending of them very much, right up until the thing is mended. Then they lose all interest and they go looking for the next one bleeding on the floor. Her lovely mouth curved. Enjoy your season, Maid. They are always shorter than they feel. She was gone before Celine could answer, in a drift of expensive scent, leaving the words hanging in the cold stairwell like smoke. And though Celine knew them for poison, she also felt them find the old wound and settle into it, because they were, word for word, almost exactly the thing her mother used to say. The evenings were how it truly changed. When the child slept, Celine would sit by the nursery fire with her mending, and more nights than not there would come a knock, and it would be him. And he would stand in the doorway as though the room belonged to a country he was not sure he had permission to enter. She laughed today, he said, the first night. It was not a question. She did. He was quiet a while. My brother had that laugh, he said finally. Alexander, I had not heard it in this house since we put him in the ground. I did not know how much I was missing it until a stranger gave it back to me from a nursery. He looked at his own hands. I do not know how to thank a person for a thing like that. In my world, when a man gives you something you cannot repay, it is usually the beginning of the debt he means to own you with. I do not want to own you, Celine said. I want you to sit down. You are too tall for that doorway, and you make the whole room nervous. He almost smiled. He did not sit. But he came one step inside, and that was further than he had come the night before, and she was learning to measure this careful man in single steps. She learned other things in those evenings, laid down one at a time like cards. That he slept barely 4 hours. That he read every letter twice when he was worried and never once when he was calm. That he had raised his younger brother himself after their father died, and had failed, in his own private accounting, to keep that brother alive, and carried it like a stone sewn into his coat. And he learned things about her, though she gave them up more slowly. You flinch, he said one night, when I move too fast toward the table. Only then. Not at anything else. Not at me, when I am still. His dark eyes did not leave her. Someone taught your body that quick movement means harm. Celine's hands went still over her mending. The fire popped. From very far away she heard the old refrain, her mother's voice worn into her like a groove. You are too much, Soline. Too loud, too wide, too soft. No man keeps a thing that fills the whole doorway. Be grateful for whatever scraps of a life you are handed and do not go asking for more. My mother, she said at last, had very firm opinions about how much space a girl like me was allowed to take up in the world. And a man, later, who agreed with her. She lifted her chin. But I have found a great deal more room out here than either of them promised me. So I am not taking their advice anymore. Emmerich Kova looked at her for a long moment across the sleeping child and the low fire. Whoever they were, he said very quietly, they were counting the wrong thing. And then, before she could answer, before the warmth in the room could become something neither of them was ready to name, he wished her good night and was gone. And she sat a long time with the wooden bird in her palm and her heart doing something it had been warned all its life never to do. The ring lived in her apron pocket for 9 days, wrapped in a scrap of linen before she tried to give it back. She found the old woman on the south terrace, wrapped in furs against the salt wind, watching the grey sea worry the rocks below. Up close, in the flat morning light, Zora Kovar looked thinner than she had in the hall, and there was a grey cast beneath the powder on her cheeks that no cosmetic had been able to fully hide. "I know why you have come," Zora said without turning. "Sit. You will strain your neck standing over me, and I am too old to be loomed at." Soline sat. She took the wrapped ring from her pocket and held it out on her open palm. "I cannot keep this, madam. It is not mine, and I will not be given to your son like a horse at a fair, however kindly it is meant. A person is not a thing you can hand to another person. Not even you can do that." Zora looked at the ring and then at the woman offering it, and did not take it back. "You think I am giving you to him?" The old woman almost laughed. "Child, I am the mother of the most dangerous man on this coast. I did not build his power by handing him things. I built it by teaching him the one lesson that men like my son learn last, if they learn it at all." She turned her sharp eyes on Soline. "You cannot keep a living thing by closing your hand on it. You keep it by leaving your hand open, and being the kind of house it chooses not to leave. My grandchild taught herself that lesson from you in an afternoon. My son is going to need longer." She folded Soline's fingers back over the ring, gently, the second time she had done so. "I am not giving you to him," Zora said. "I'm giving you a place to stand while he learns. The ring is not a leash, Soline Fen. It is a door with your name on it, and no one in this house, not my son, not that painted woman circling him, not the whole coast, gets to decide whether you walk through it but you. That is the only kind of marriage worth the name. And it is the only kind I will allow under my roof for whatever time I have left to allow anything. Whatever time I have left." The words hung in the salt air. Soline looked at the grey beneath the old woman's powder, and did not pretend she had not heard. "Madam," she said carefully, "how long?" Zora's face closed like a fist. "That," she said, "is between me and my physician and the sea, and you will keep it there. Give me your word. Not one soul, not my son, especially not my son. He will try to fix it, and it cannot be fixed, and he has buried enough this year without watching the clock run out on me too." Her voice dropped, and for the first time it was not iron, but something older and more tired underneath. "Let me settle this one thing before I go. Let me see the child safe in the arms of someone who chose her freely. Give me that." Soline closed her hand around the ring, and this time she did not offer it back. "I give you my word," she said. "About the silence, not about the marriage. That door stays mine. That door stays yours." Zora's eyes glinted with something like satisfaction. "Good. I would think less of you if you had promised me anything else." They sat together in the wind a while longer, the young woman and the dying one, and it was almost peaceful. It did not stay peaceful. Down in the courtyard below the terrace, Goran, the master's lieutenant, had gone rigid beside the black cars, a folded paper in his gloved hand, his face turned up toward the two women on the terrace and then quickly away. He had found the thing tucked beneath the wiper of the lead car that morning and had not yet decided how to carry it to his master. It was a photograph. It showed the plus-size maid on the cliff path with the Kovar child's hand in hers, the pair of them circled in red ink, and across the bottom, in a stranger's careful hand, 4 words. "We see her too." Goran turned the photograph face down against his chest. He was a careful man and a loyal one, and he understood at once the 2 things his master would understand the moment this reached him. The first was that someone outside these walls had learned that the untouchable child now had a soft and unguarded heart, and that the fastest road to hurting Emmerich Kovar no longer ran through his guns or his ships or his men. It ran up a cliff path, holding a little girl's hand. The second thing Goran understood was worse. Whoever had left this had stood close enough to take the picture, close enough to touch them both. And no one had seen him come, and no one had seen him go. Above him on the terrace, the 2 women sat on in the wind, the old one and the young one, neither of them yet knowing that the quiet season had just ended, and that the world Soline had wandered into 11 days, a maid had now quietly, and with a red circle of ink, decided to notice her back. Goran brought the photograph to his master that evening. In the low room where Emmerich Kovar handled the parts of his business, the rest of the coast preferred not to think about. Emmerich looked at it for a long time. The child's hand in the maid's, the red circle, the 4 words. He did not shout. Men who shout are afraid of being ignored, and Emmerich Kovar had never once in his life been ignored. He simply set the photograph flat on the desk, pressed one finger against the red ink over Anouk's small circled face, and went very still. And Goran, who had stood beside this man through 3 wars of the harbor, felt the temperature of the room drop. "Who?" Emmerich said. "We are asking, quietly. Whoever left it wanted us to know they could reach the cars. That is a message, not a mistake." They reached the cliff path. Emmerich's voice did not rise. "They stood close enough to photograph a child I have kept behind walls and guns for a year, and they did it while she held the hand of a woman who does not know how to be afraid of anything." He looked up, and something had closed behind his eyes, some old cold door swinging shut. Double the men on the path. No one takes the child past the south wall, and the maid does not leave the grounds, for any reason. She will want a reason. She does not get one. And there it was, the first thin crack of the thing that would one day break everything, though neither man knew it yet. The instinct of a man who had learned that the only way to keep a thing alive was to close his hand around it until it could not move. Upstairs, Soline learned none of this. What she learned instead was that Isabeau Renard had been busy. She found the elegant woman waiting in the nursery corridor again, and this time Isabeau was smiling, and the smile was worse than any sneer. "I have been curious about you," Isabeau said, "so I made some inquiries. It is remarkable what a little money will buy, for instance." She drew a slow breath, savoring it. "I know about the wedding. Your wedding. The one that did not happen because the groom took one look at his bride coming up the aisle and told a room full of guests that he could not spend his life being crushed under so much woman. Corin, was it?" "Yes. Corin. He was very quotable, apparently. Half the town still repeats it." The corridor tilted. Soline's hands went cold and the old voice rose up in her, her mother's voice and Corin's voice braided into one rope. "Too much. Too much, woman. No man will spend his life crushed under you. Be grateful you were asked at all." "I see the name still lands," Isabeau murmured, watching her face with the interest of a woman watching a coin sink in clear water. "Good, because he is going to be at the harvest ball on Saturday, as my guest. And I am going to stand you next to him in front of the whole coast, in that grey uniform, wearing the old woman's ring, and let everyone see exactly what Zora Kovar has chosen for her son, the maid no man could stand to marry." She stepped close. "The ring does not change what you are, it only makes the fall further." For one long moment Soline could not speak. The wound was too old and too deep, and Isabeau had put her thumb directly into it. And then, because she had spent her whole life reading Frightened Creatures, Celine looked past the cruelty and actually saw the woman in front of her. The tension wired through the elegant jaw, the grip too tight on the little jeweled bag, the fear underneath, naked and desperate. "You are terrified," Celine said quietly. Isabeau's smile flickered. "You have wanted him since you were children, and the old woman looked past you, and she looked at me, and it has frightened you so badly that you have gone hunting through my worst day to find a stone to throw." Soline's voice steadied as the other woman's certainty wavered. "I know that feeling, being so afraid of not being chosen that you would rather break someone than be left standing alone. I lived inside that feeling for most of my life. It is a terrible small room to live in, Isabeau. I hope you get out of it before it costs you everything." Isabeau's face went white, then red. "Saturday," she said, but her voice had lost its silk. "Wear the ring. I insist." And she fled, heels sharp on the stone, leaving Soline alone in the corridor with a wound reopened and a date circled now in her mind as surely as the child's face had been circled in red. Saturday. The harvest ball, where the whole coast would watch her stand beside the man who had told a room she was too much to love. That night, Soline sat by the nursery fire with the wooden bird turning in her fingers and let herself feel all of it, the whole old weight, the thing she had learned long ago, that you must let a frightened creature come the whole way into the room before you can send it out again. She thought of the girl at the sea wall, learning that the water could roar and never climb the path. She thought of the old woman pressing a ring into her hand and calling it a door. And she made a decision that surprised her, sitting alone in the dark. She would go to the ball, she would wear the ring. She would stand beside the man who had broken her and let the whole coast look, and she would not, this time, be the one who broke. She had spent 7 years letting Corin's words decide how much space she was allowed. She was done handing that power to men who had never earned it. Saturday would belong to her, or it would belong to no one. The great hall that had held the broken memorial now held 400 guests, gold light and music, and Celine came down the long stair in a borrowed gown of deep green with the old ring on her finger, and her heart going like a caught bird. She had almost not come. She had lingered at the top of the stair, telling herself she could send word that she was ill, that the child needed her, any of 100 true and cowardly things. And then Anouk had come and put the wooden bird in her hand and looked up at her. And Soline had understood that she could not teach this child to walk toward the sea that had hurt her and then refuse to walk toward her own. So she came down. Isabeau found her within minutes, radiant and merciless, a slender man in an expensive suit at her elbow. He had thinner hair than Soline remembered, and a softer chin, and when his eyes found her, his face did the thing it had always done, the small flinch of distaste he had never once bothered to hide. "Soline," said Corinne, "my, there is even more of you than there was." The guest nearest them heard it and turned, scenting blood, and Isabeau raised her lovely voice just enough to gather a crowd. "You two must have so much to catch up on. Corinne was just telling me about your wedding day. Or, well, the day that was meant to be." It was happening exactly as Isabeau had built it. The circle of faces, the waiting laughter, the old cold sweat. And for one heartbeat Soline was 23 again, and standing in a doorway in a dress she had saved a year for, watching a man decide out loud that she was more than he was willing to carry. Then she chose, for the first time in her life, not to be 23 anymore. "We do have a great deal to catch up on," Soline said, and her voice did not shake, and it carried. "Corinne, you told a church full of people that you could not spend your life crushed under so much woman. Do you remember? I remembered it every day for 7 years. I let those words decide what I was allowed to want. I let them make me small in every way a person can be made small except the one you meant." She looked around the circle of watching faces, unhurried now, strangely calm. "Here is what I have learned since. A man who is frightened of a large woman is not frightened of her size. He is frightened that she might take up her full space in the world and still not need him. That is what you saw coming up that aisle. Not too much woman. A woman who was about to stop apologizing for existing. And you were right to run. I would have outgrown you by the second year." Someone in the crowd laughed. It was not aimed at Soline. It was aimed at Corinne, and it spread, low and delighted, the sound of 400 people who had come hungry for a humiliation and discovered they were watching the wrong person be humiliated. A woman near the front, jeweled and severe, murmured to her companion loud enough to carry that she had never in her life heard a thing said so well, and that the soft little man in the good suit should have stayed wherever the elegant Renard girl had dug him up. Corin's soft face mottled. He had come expecting the woman he had left, the one who apologized, the one who made herself small so that small men could feel large beside her. He had not come expecting this. "You are a maid," he said, reaching for the only stone he had left. "I am a great many things," Soline said. "And every one of them takes up exactly as much room as it needs, and I am done asking permission for any of it." She turned to Isabeau, and her voice gentled, which was somehow worse. "You brought him all this way to make me small in front of these people. But you cannot make a person small by telling the truth about their worst day. You can only do it by making them ashamed of it. And I am not ashamed anymore. So you have spent a great deal of money to give me the finest evening of my life. Thank you." The hall was silent. And then, from somewhere near the great doors, one pair of hands began to clap, slow and deliberate, and every head turned, and it was Emmerich Kovar. He crossed the floor through a crowd that parted for him like water, and he did not look at Corinne, and he did not look at Isabeau. He looked only at Soline. He stopped before her, and in front of 400 of the most dangerous and powerful people on the coast, the man whose name they whispered took her large hand in both of his and lifted it and pressed his mouth to the old ring on her finger. Every person in this room, Emmerich said without raising his voice, so that they all had to be silent to hear it, learned tonight what my mother learned in an afternoon, and I have been too slow to say aloud. This woman is worth more than the whole of my house and everyone standing in it. His dark eyes held hers, including me. Celine forgot the crowd. She forgot Corin and Isabeau and the whole gold hall. There was only the feared man looking at her as though she were the one thing in his violent world that had ever made sense, and she leaned up and she kissed him, and he went utterly still the way he always did before he let himself want a thing, and then his arms came around her wide and certain, and he kissed her back as though the room had emptied. It should have been the happiest moment of her life. It nearly was. She felt him stiffen, not with feeling, with alarm. She opened her eyes and followed his gaze across the hall to where Goran had appeared in the doorway, his face grey, moving fast toward them through the crowd, and she heard the lieutenant's low, urgent voice reach his master over the music. "Sir, the child's room, she is gone." They found Anouk on the cliff path in the dark. She had climbed from her bed, slipped past a doubled guard that was watching the walls and not the small door a child could fit through, and walked out alone toward the seawall where Soline had taught her that the water could roar all it liked and never climb the path. Two of the men had a stranger pinned against the rocks 100 yards on, a man who had come over the south wall in the confusion of the ball, sent to prove that Emmerich's enemies could reach even the youngest and most guarded person in his house. Emmerich had him taken from the estate that same night, and the man never showed his face on the coast again, but that was later. In the moment, there was only the small figure at the sea wall, and the wind, and Emmerich Kova running as Soline had never seen a man run, and reaching his brother's daughter 1 instant before the thing that had been walking toward her out of the dark could close the distance. Anouk did not scream, that was the worst of it. She had gone somewhere far back inside herself, the way she had the day of the memorial, rigid and glass-eyed and silent, and she stayed there through the carrying and the blankets and the doctor, locked behind a door that Emmerich beat on with every soft word he had and could not open. "Let me," Soline said. She sat on the floor of the nursery, the way she had that first day, and she did not reach for the child. She took the wooden bird from her own pocket, where it had ridden all evening, and she set it on the rug in the small space between them, and she began, very low, to hum the tune of a few notes. The house held its breath. Emmerich stood against the wall with his fists closed and his jaw locked, and for the first time in his adult life he did the hardest thing a man like him can do. He did nothing. He let a woman he could not control sit on a floor and work at a lock he could not force. And he trusted her over his own instinct to act, and it cost him visibly, every second of it. It took an hour. Then Anouk's small cold hand crept across the rug and closed around the wooden bird, and her eyes came back from wherever they had gone, and she looked at Soline and said in a cracked whisper, "You came down the stairs. In the green." "I did," Soline said, her voice not steady at all. "And I am not going anywhere. You would have to try very hard." The child crawled into the soft wide safety of her and slept. Later, much later, when the doctor had gone and the house had gone quiet, Emmerich Kovar lowered himself to the nursery floor beside them, this man who owned buildings and men and half the harbor, and he sat with his back against the child's bed and his head in his hands, and he came apart very quietly, the way strong men do when they have finally run out of the strength to stay whole. "I did this," he said. "My brother, Alexander. He wanted out of all of it. He wanted to take Mira and the baby and go somewhere my name meant nothing, and I told him no. I told him there was no out, that we protect what is ours by holding it close, and 3 weeks later the sea took their boat, and it was not the sea, Soline. It was a man I had crossed, and I knew it, and I have never said it aloud until this moment." His shoulders shook. "I held them so close I got them killed, and tonight I nearly did it again to her, to you." Celine reached across the sleeping child and put her hand flat against the side of his bowed head, the way the girl had once touched her cheek. "Listen to me," she said softly. "A man who answers every fear with a closed fist is not protecting anything. He is just letting the fear do his thinking. You did not kill your brother. A frightened man did, and you have been that frightened man ever since, and it is time to set him down." Her thumb moved against his hair. "You cannot keep us safe by keeping us. You already know that. Your mother knew it. The child knew it. You are the last one in this house to learn it." "Tell me how," he said, and there was no command left in it, only a man asking. "Tell me how you do it. You have every reason to keep your own hands shut. I have read what was done to you, the mother, the man at the altar. A person who has been hurt like that learns to guard everything, and instead you sat on my floor and opened your hands to a child who could have bolted for the cliff night after night with no promise she would ever open hers back. How? Celine was quiet a moment, and the fire settled, and far below the window the sea kept its low, endless work against the rock. Because I found out the guarding never kept anything safe either, she said at last. I closed my hands for 30 years, around my own heart mostly. I made myself small, I apologized for the room I took up, I took the scraps I was offered and called it love, all to keep from being hurt again. And I was hurt anyway, Emmerich. That is the thing no one tells you. The closed fist does not spare you the loss. It only spares you the living, right up until the loss comes for you anyway. She looked down at the sleeping child between them, the small chest rising and falling steady now. So I decided I would rather have the living. All of it. Even the part that can be taken. Especially that part. Because that is the only part that was ever worth having. Emmerich lifted his ruined face to hers. And if I cannot, he said. If the fear is older than I am, then I will still be here, she said, teaching you, the way I taught her, slowly, one open hand at a time. He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face that had been clenched since the day they buried his brother finally began to loosen. He took her hand from his hair and held it against his chest, over the hard, frightened hammering of his heart, and they sat together on the floor with the rescued child between them until the sky over the sea went gray. But even then, even with her hand on his heart and his tears barely dry, Soline felt the thing that did not settle in him. She felt it in the way his eyes kept going to the window, to the wall, to the dark beyond it. The fear had not left, it had only crouched. And a man does not unlearn in a single night what 30 years of blood has taught him. He made the arrangements before she woke. By the time Celine came down the next morning, grey with no sleep and soft with everything the night had opened in her, it was already done. There were cases in the entrance hall, not hers, new ones, expensive, packed by other hands. Goran would not meet her eyes. And Emmerich stood in the great hall with a folder of papers and the flat, decided calm of a man who has already had the argument in his own head and won it. There is a house, he said, in the south past the border, under another name. It is safe. It is beautiful. The child is already being prepared to travel. You will both be gone by dark, and you will want for nothing, ever, and no one will ever put a red circle around either of your faces again. He held out the folder. It is all arranged, a settlement that will keep you and the girl in comfort for the rest of your lives. You will not have to work, you will not have to be afraid, you will simply be safe, away from me, away from my name. It is the only thing I have left to give you that will not get you killed. Soline looked at the cases. She looked at the folder. She looked at the man she had held on a nursery floor 8 hours before, offering to send her away with his brother's child and a fortune, and calling it a gift. And the old voice rose up in her one final time, her mother and Corin and every person who had ever decided her fate without asking. Too much, a liability, a thing to be handled, settled, removed for everyone's good. Be grateful. Take the scraps, do not go asking for more. But she was not 23 anymore. She was not even the woman who had come down the stairs in green. She was a woman who had spent a season teaching a broken child and a broken man that a life is not a thing you can arrange for another person, and she was not about to unteach it now for the comfort of being taken care of. No, Soline said. Emmerich blinked. You have not read the terms. I do not need to read the terms. You did the same thing to me that you did to your brother. Her voice was very quiet and it did not shake. He wanted a life you had not chosen for him, and you told him no, and you called it protection. And now you have looked at the one good frightening thing that has happened to you in a year, and it has scared you so badly that you would rather ship it across a border in a box than risk losing it. You are not saving me, Emmerich. You are closing your hand, exactly the way we agreed you would stop. There is a man out there who wants to hurt me. I know that. I have known it since Goran found that photograph, which you also decided I was not allowed to be told about. She saw the flicker in his face and knew she had guessed right. Yes, I know about that too. The doubled guard. The order that I not leave the grounds. You built a cage around me a week ago and did not even tell me it was there. And you called that love. and now you are shipping the cage across a border and calling that love too. Her voice cracked and steadied. Then that is the thing we decide what to do about, together, out loud, like people. She stepped closer and her eyes were bright and hard. You do not get to decide my life is too dangerous to be mine and hand me a folder. You watched me let that child say no. Every single day you watched me stop when she was afraid, wait at the door, leave my hand open. And the first time your fear got loud, you reached out and did the one thing I told you I would not survive being done to me again. You decided I was easier to move than to ask. His jaw worked. I am trying to keep you alive. Men have been trying to keep me small my whole life, and every single one of them called it something kind. The ring was suddenly heavy on her hand. My mother called it looking out for me. Corinne called it honesty. You call it protection. It is all the same closed fist, and I have finally grown too large for it. She drew a breath that hurt. I will not be sent anywhere, not even somewhere safe, not even by you. Then you are choosing the danger. I am choosing to be a person, she said. And so is she. You cannot love someone by taking away their whole life and mailing it back to them insured. For a moment, they stood facing each other across the wreck of it, and she saw the anger flash in him, the old dangerous thing that made powerful men lower their voices, and she saw her own body brace for it the way it had learned to brace long ago. And he saw her flinch, and that, more than anything she had said, stopped him cold. His face went ashen. You are frightened of me, he said hoarsely. I am frightened of how easily you decided my no did not count. She reached down, and she worked the old ring from her finger, and she held it out to him on her open palm, and it was the hardest thing she had ever done. Your mother told me this was a door with my name on it, that no one but me got to decide whether I walked through it. She was wrong about one thing. She thought you would learn in time. Her eyes filled. Take it back, Emmerich. I will not wear a door that a man can lock from the outside. He did not take the ring. He could not seem to move at all. Unpack the child's things, Soline said. To Goran, to the room, to no one. She is not going anywhere in a box either. And I am leaving. Tonight. By my own feet through the front gate because I choose to. Not because you sent me. She closed her hand around the ring one last time and set it gently on the table between them and walked away from the most feared man on the coast while he stood among the packed cases of the life he had tried to arrange for her and could not say a single word to stop her because there was not one word left that he had the right to say. She went back to the town below the cliffs, to a narrow room above the shelter kitchen where she had once scrubbed pots, and the old woman who ran it took one look at her face and asked no questions and gave her a bed and a job. It was small, and it was hers. The window looked at a brick wall and the pipes knocked at night and the whole of it would have fit inside the Kova nursery twice over, and Celine lay in it that first night and wept until she was empty, and then she got up in the morning and went down and fed the bread line, and her hands, she noticed, did not shake once. They never did, over the frightened and the hungry. It was only the watching, judging world that had ever made them tremble, and there was none of that here. Here there was only work worth doing, and she did it. She had walked out of the great house by her own 2 feet, through the front gate, in the daylight, exactly as she had promised. No one had stopped her. That was the part she had not been ready for. She had braced her whole body for the hand on her arm, the raised voice, the reasons dressed up as care, all the ways every man in her life had ever kept her from leaving a room. And instead, the most feared man on the coast had stood among the packed cases of the life he had tried to arrange for her and let her go. It should have felt like winning. It felt like grief. The old woman who ran the shelter watched her over the soup pots for a week and finally said, one evening, that a person did not cry like that over a job. Celine told her the whole of it then, standing at the great steaming pots, the ring and the child and the folder and the front gate, and the old woman listened to all of it and was quiet a while, and then said only that it sounded to her like the young man had done in the end the one hard right thing, and that a woman ought to be careful about punishing a man for finally learning the lesson she had been trying to teach him. Celine did not answer, but she thought about it, over the pots, long after. Emmerich Kova did not come. That was the thing she had not let herself expect, and it undid her more than any pursuit could have. He did not send men. He did not send cars. He did not appear at the shelter door to reason or command or carry her back. The one time in her life a man had been given the chance to prove he had heard the word no and would honor it, and it was him, and he honored it, and she hated how much that mattered to her. He sent one letter. It came the third day, in his own hard hand, and it said this: I have read the terms you tried to teach me more times than I have read any contract in my life. You were right about all of it, about my brother, about the folder, about the fist. I told myself for a year that holding a thing close was the same as keeping it safe, and you were the first person with the courage to tell me to my face that it is the same as strangling it. I will not come to your door. You told me no, and I am learning slowly, one open hand at a time, exactly as you promised you would teach me. The ring is here when the door is yours to open, and not one moment before. It will wait as long as you need. So will I. He had not signed it with his name. He had signed it, I am trying. She read it every night for a week and answered it not at all. But the news of the great house came down to the town anyway, the way news does. That the master had found the man behind the red circle, a rival named Rennick who had thought the child a soft place to press. That everyone had expected a body in the harbor, the old answer, the only answer Emmerich Kovar had ever given. And that instead the master had done something no one understood. He had gathered proof, quiet and complete, and handed the man to enemies of his own making, and broken him without a single shot, and let him live to watch his own power taken apart. A man ruled by fear kills, the harbor said, puzzled. This was something else. This was a man who had decided for the first time to answer a fear with something other than a fist. Soline heard it in the breadline and had to sit down. She knew what she was hearing. She had said the words to him herself, on the nursery floor, with his tears not yet dry. A man who answers every fear with a closed fist is only letting the fear do his thinking. He had listened. He had taken the hardest thing she had ever tried to teach a person, and he had carried it out into the one part of his life where no one had ever expected mercy of him, and he had done it while she was gone, with no way of knowing she would ever hear of it, with nothing to gain. He had not done it to win her back. He had done it because she had been right, and somehow that undid her more than any grand gesture could have. And there was other news, worse news, that reached her the same week, that old Zora Kovar had taken to her bed and would not be rising from it again. That the doctors came and went with their faces carefully blank. That the child, the little one who had just begun to speak, had gone silent once more and would not eat, and sat all day at the south wall above the sea with a small wooden bird in her fist, watching the cliff path, waiting for a wide grey shape that did not come. Soline sat in her narrow room with the letter in her hands, and the whole cost of her own courage laid out in front of her, and for the first time since she had walked through the Kova gate by her own choice, she did not know what the right thing was anymore. The storm came in off the sea on the 9th night, and it was during the storm that the child went over the wall. Soline learned it the way she learned everything now, second-hand, too late, from a boy who ran down to the shelter with his cap in his hands because the whole town had been raised to search. The Kova girl was gone, slipped out into the wind and the dark the way she had once before, only this time there was no ball to hide the doing of it, and no guard close enough, and no one who knew where a small silent child would go. But Soline knew. She was up the cliff path before she had finished pulling on her coat, into a wind that tried to take her off her feet. Calling a name the storm tore away, and she found the small figure exactly where she knew she would, at the seawall, soaked through and shaking and blue-lipped and clutching the wooden bird, staring down at the water that had taken everyone the child had ever tried to keep. Anouk. Soline fell to her knees on the wet stone. I am here. I came. I am so sorry it took me so long. The child turned and did the thing she had never done for anyone. She launched herself off the wall into Soline's arms and buried her face in the wide, warm safety of her and said, over and over into the storm, "You came, you came, you came." And Soline wrapped her whole large body around the small cold one and held on. Headlights swung across the rain. Soline did not have to turn to know. Emmerich Kovar came up the cliff path on foot through the storm, coatless, having outrun his own cars, and he stopped a dozen feet away, and he did not close the distance. He stood in the rain and looked at the woman and the child wrapped together on the wet stone, and he waited. She is breathing, Soline called over the wind. She is cold, she needs to be warm and she needs it now. My house is closest. He said it and then at once held up an open hand, as though to take even that back. But it is your choice. Not a box, not an order. She goes where you say she goes. Tell me where, and I will carry her there. And I will leave the moment I have set her down, if that is what you want. You have my word. I have gotten very good this month at leaving when you tell me to. And there it was, the whole world turned over. The man who had once stood in an archway and told her to step back and not touch what belonged to his family, now stood bareheaded in a storm, asking a housemaid's permission to carry his own blood in out of the rain. Your house, Celine said. Carry her, and you do not leave. He crossed the last of the distance then, and he gathered the child up against his chest, and the three of them went down the cliff path together through the storm to the great stone house, where it had all begun. They put Anouk in a warm bed, and she would not sleep until both of them were in the room. Only when Soline sat on one side of her and Emmerich on the other did the child close her eyes, one hand fisted in Soline's sleeve and one in her uncle's, the wooden bird beneath her cheek. And it was there that a maid came quietly to the door. She is asking for you. Both of you, the maid whispered. The mistress. She says she does not have the patience left to wait until morning. Zora Kovar was very small in the great bed, smaller than the ring she had worn for 51 years, and the grey had won at last, but her eyes were as sharp as the day she had knelt in the broken china and known a wife when she saw one. She looked at the two of them come in together, storm-soaked and hollow-eyed and holding hands, and something in her worn face eased. There, she breathed. There, I told you. Did I not tell you? Her gaze found Soline. You left. Good. I would have thought less of you if you had not. A door only means something if you can walk out of it. Her thin hand moved on the coverlet, and in it was the ring, the old gold, the dark worn stone. Her son had placed it in her keeping the day Soline left, and she had kept it by her ever since. Come here, girl. Closer. My arm does not go as far as it did. Soline knelt by the bed. I never gave this to my son, Zora said, so quietly that only Soline could hear. I have never once given it to anyone. It is not mine to give. It only ever goes to the one who is free to refuse it and stays anyway. Her fingers set it into Soline's palm and this time did not close over them. She left the hand open. I am not asking you to take it. I am only telling you it is there. The rest is yours. It was always only ever yours. Then she looked at her son, standing at the foot of the bed with his heart in his ruined face, and Zora Kovar smiled the last true smile of a long and dangerous life. Ask her, she said, properly, on your own 2 feet like a man and not from behind a folder. And if she says no, you thank her for the honor of the asking and you let her go, and you keep the hand open. That is the whole of it, Emmerich. That is everything I know. That is everything I have left to teach you. Emmerich Kovar came around the bed and lowered himself to his knees beside the woman who had walked into his house one autumn and taken it apart and put it back together softer than she found it. He did not reach for the ring in her open hand. He looked at her, only her, the way he had that first day across the broken china, when she had seen the man behind the master and he had known that she had seen. I have nothing to offer you that is not frightening, he said. My name is a danger. My world is a danger. I am, on my worst days, a danger. You saw the very worst of me, and you were right to walk out that door. His voice broke and he let it. But I have spent a month learning to keep my hand open, and I am asking you now, with it open, ordering nothing, arranging nothing, stay. Not because my mother said so, not because the child needs you though she does, and so do I. Stay because you looked at all of me, and you were free to go, and you chose us anyway. That is the only kind of staying I will ever ask you for again. The old woman watched from her pillows. The child slept down the hall with the wooden bird beneath her cheek. The sea worked at the cliffs below the window the way it always had and always would, roaring all it liked, unable to climb the path. And Soline Fen, who had been told her whole life that she was too much to be chosen, looked down at the open hand of the most feared man on the coast and the old ring lying in her own open palm, and understood at last that the two of them had finally learned the same lesson from opposite ends of a life. She did not hand him the ring. She slid it onto her own finger by her own choice because it had always only ever been hers. Get up off the floor, she said, and her voice shook and she let it, and she was smiling through the whole of it. You are too tall for kneeling, and you make the whole room nervous, and I have decided to spend a very long time teaching you how to be less frightening. She took his open hand and closed her fingers through his, the first hand either of them had held without fear of it closing. Yes, I choose it. I choose all of it. Now stand up and come and be my family. He stood, and the man whose name made powerful men lower their voices bent his head against the shoulder of a woman the world had called too much, and for the first time in a life built entirely out of holding on, Emmerich Kova simply let himself be held. Zora closed her eyes, satisfied. She lived long enough, in the end, to see the door stay open, and the wife her son needed walk through it because she wanted to, and never once because she was told.